Most first-time CEOs don't struggle to scale because they lack strategy or aren't working hard enough. They struggle because the way that they're operating is no longer right for the stage the business is at. What got them here is now getting in the way. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through the 5 mistakes I see first-time CEOs making that are keeping them stuck in the weeds and over-involved. And as we go through these, if you want to see whether the way that you're currently operating has evolved at the same pace as your business, then in the description below, you can take my CEO Evolution Assessment. It's a free diagnostic that in 7 minutes will show you what's keeping the business too dependent on you. I'm Byron Morrison. I'm the author of The Effective CEO 2.0, and I've helped first-time scale-up CEOs in 18 countries to become the leader their business needs to take it to the next level. And what I found is that the mistakes that slow down scaling are remarkably consistent across countries, companies, and industries. And once you start recognizing the patterns, that's when you can start fixing them. So let's dive into them. The first mistake is one of the most common, and it's also one of the least talked about. Because most first-time CEOs I work with have never had their role as CEO clearly defined for them. Whether they built the company or they grew into running it, no one's ever sat them down and clarified, this is what your role actually looks like. This is where your time should be going, and this is what you shouldn't be doing. So what happens? They default to what they know. And this causes them to fill their time with whatever feels urgent, important that day, or that they know how to do well. And what keeps happening is by operating that way, they stay busy, but they're busy on the wrong things. And a way to tell whether or not you're in this trap is if you can reach the end of the week and despite constantly working, you look back and you don't actually know what you move forward. Not what you did, but what actually grew the business or furthered the strategy to get it to the next level. Because that's what happens when your role isn't clearly defined, as every problem, decision, and fire feel like they could legitimately be yours to handle. And that's why so many first-time CEOs stay too involved. Not because they're a control freak, but because nobody, including them, has clearly drawn the line between where their role ends and where everyone else's begins. This is one of the biggest sources of stress and overwhelm that I hear when I start working with a CEO. And the reason that so many of them are stuck in this trap is because busyness feels like progress and getting things done feels like leadership. This is why staying across everything feels responsible, when what's actually happening is the work that only they can do in terms of setting direction, making key decisions, and developing leadership around them is constantly being displaced by whatever needed solving or that felt productive in the moment. This is why clarity on your role and priorities is so important. And if you're struggling with this, then I actually have a full video on what a CEO should actually be doing that I'll link at the end. But in short, one of the first things I work through with every CEO that I coach is getting clear on the answer to 3 questions. Where does your time have the greatest impact? What can only be done by you? And what shouldn't still be on your plate? Having this clarity is key, as you can't say no to the wrong work if you haven't clearly defined what the right work actually is. The second mistake is directly connected to the first, and that is staying too involved because it feels quicker or like you know best. I see this all the time where first-time CEO is stuck in the day-to-day, not because they don't know they should step back, but because in the moment, stepping in feels like the right call. You may have seen this yourself where a problem comes up and you know how to fix it, so you fix it. Or a decision lands that would take 10 minutes to explain to someone else, so you just make it yourself. Or you see someone on your team struggling, so it feels quicker just to step in yourself to help them. In the moment, all of those choices feel logical. But here's what most people miss. Just because you can do something doesn't mean that you should. Because every time that you jump in, 2 things happen at the same time. First, your team learns that if they wait long enough or if the problem is hard enough, you'll just come back in and handle it. And second, you confirm to yourself and to them that they can't do it without you. Both sides deepen the dependency at once, and this compounds in a way that you can't see until the pattern is already embedded. because every rescue teaches the business to bring the next problem straight to you. Not because you want it, but because that's what the business has learned. Now, you may be watching this and recognizing both of those first two mistakes clearly. And if that's the case, you'll likely feel like you've already tried to fix them. You've delegated more, you've protected your time, and you've tried to step back. You may even have told your team they need to make decisions without you. Yet despite all of that, it hasn't fully held. Well, the reason that's happening usually isn't just what you're doing, it's something far deeper. And that's what mistake number 3 is about. Mistake 3 is also the mistake that nobody talks about. And it's the reason the first two keep coming back, even after a CEO genuinely tried to fix them. And that is trying to fix an identity problem with tactical solutions. As most CEOs who are too central to everything try to solve it with better systems and processes. So they delegate more, they try to reorganize their calendar, and they put procedures in place. And it works for a while, but it's only a matter of time before they find themselves right back in the middle of everything. It's not because the changes weren't real, and instead it's because something deeper keeps pulling them back into the day-to-day. And what that usually is that their identity hasn't caught up with the role the business now needs them to play. The reason this happens is after years of relentless work and grinding to get to where they are, their identity has tied their value to what they get done and the output they create. So they thrive as being the doer and the one who keeps things moving. That identity formed as the way of operating was needed in the earlier stages to build the business or to get them to where they are in their career. But one of the biggest mindset shifts to take away from this video is that the version of you built the business is not the version of you needed to scale it. And this is also why a lot of CEOs stay stuck in this pattern far longer than they need to. Because on some level, they believe they should be able to figure it out themselves. After all, they built the business by solving problems, carrying pressure, and finding a way through. So when they hit this stage, asking for help can feel like a weakness, like they should have the answer, or like admitting that they need support means that they're not as capable as they thought. If you look at the top CEOs, executives, and high performers, though, one thing they all have in common is they surround themselves with the right support because they recognize that they need someone in their corner to challenge their thinking, to give them different perspectives, and to push them to reach their full potential. Whereas overwhelmed CEOs, they tend to let their ego and pride get in the way. I see this all the time. I had one client who followed my content for over a year before reaching out. Not because he didn't know that he needed help or that the problem wasn't worth solving, but because part of him thought that he should be able to figure it out on his own. And all that did was keep him stuck in the weeds and not driving the growth he wanted for a year longer than he needed it to. That's the trap. Because the same identity that keeps you too involved in the business also keeps you from getting the support that would help you change it. You've no doubt heard that what got you to where you are won't get you to where you want to be. And until your identity shifts, not just in how you view where your value lies, but in how you think, lead, and the way that you see your role, the pattern will keep coming back. That's because CEO work doesn't feel productive in the same way that operational work does. For instance, you can spend an afternoon thinking through a major decision and at the end of it have nothing tangible to point to that you did. Or you can spend a morning mapping out your strategy for the next 90 days and from the outside, it looks like you didn't do much at all. But that thinking and decision could alter the direction of the business for years to come, or that strategy could directly impact your entire team's focus for the next quarter. Meaning this was actually the best use of your time. The reason you feel guilty for doing it, though, is because it doesn't give you that dopamine hit where the immediate feedback that comes from fixing a problem or getting something done. And this is why for a lot of CEOs, they throw themselves back into the weeds where they feel useful. Not because the weeds needed them, but because being there feels safer than sitting in the discomfort that comes with higher level work, because it doesn't have that immediate output. This is why I say it's never just a delegation or systems problem, and instead it's an identity evolution problem. That's exactly the work I do with CEOs inside the Evolve CEO. And if you're recognizing yourself in these first three mistakes, then my CEO evolution assessment is going to be your next step in getting this under control. It'll help you determine if the way you're operating has evolved at the same rate as the business, along with what needs to change. You can take it using the link in the description. The fourth mistake is leaving important decisions and essential changes within the company too late. This mistake shows up in two connected ways. The first is waiting too long to build systems and structure. Because in the early stages, doing things yourself was faster, especially when the team was small and everyone was close to everything. At that stage, formal processes felt unnecessary and in many ways even counterproductive, especially when you needed to move fast. So most founders delay it, and early on that makes sense. The problem is that most keep delaying it for far too long. They tell themselves that they'll build proper structure once things settle down, once the team is bigger and they have more time. But what actually happens is the window to build structure cleanly gets smaller as the business grows. Because at 10 people, you can change how things work in a week. Whereas at 50 people, the habits are already embedded and the culture around how decisions get made is already formed. That's why it's so much harder at that stage to change the expectations around what reaches the CEO, as trying to retrofit systems and processes into a business that's already running at pace is a lot more difficult than building them in when things are smaller and simpler. And the cost of delaying shows up in ways that CEOs don't always connect back to this mistake. Decisions queue up because there's no clarity on who needs to own them. The team escalates constantly because there's already an agreed structure for how things should move. And the CEO stays more involved than they should, not because they want to, but because the business was never built to function without them in the middle of everything. So that's the first part, waiting too long to build systems and structure. The second part of this mistake is keeping the wrong people in the wrong roles for too long. Most first-time CEOs have a deep loyalty to the people who were there at the start. It's admirable, and sticking by the people who helped you get to where you are feels like the right thing to do. But loyalty to someone doesn't mean keeping them in a role that no longer fits them or the business. Because the person who was perfect for a 10-person company is not always the right person for a 50-person one. After all, the skill set needed is different, and someone who thrives when things are fast-moving and scrappy may not have the experience or ability to manage teams, to build functions, or to operate at a more complex level. Most CEOs know this, but they delay the conversation anyway. Because if we're honest, this is one of the hardest realities when growing a company. It's the people who helped you build it may not be the people needed to help you scale it. The cost in keeping someone in the wrong role, though, is not just an underperforming individual. It's what their presence does to everyone around them. Because high performers notice, people see when things aren't running properly, and the standards and culture shift with it. Not only that, but bottlenecks start to form, and things that should move at pace start to create drag. That's why, as hard as it is, at times you have to make decisions and take actions based on what's best for the business. And I know that it's hard and it's not something that you want to deal with. And that's why I need you to hear this. Doing so does not make you a bad person. It simply means you're doing the job that you need to do. Mistakes on having the right people around you, though, also shows up in hiring as well. Because when the CEO hasn't clearly defined their own role, they also can't clearly define what they actually need to hire for. So they hire reactively for the immediate gap rather than where the business is going in the next 2 to 3 years. So 6 months later, they find themselves managing around people rather than through them. This is why the right time to build structure and have difficult conversations and to hire ahead of the curve tends to be earlier than most people think. What you have to watch for is that at the time, it may not feel like a priority, but if you leave acting on this for too long, it can become one of the biggest headaches and costliest mistakes that you're going to have to solve long term. Mistake number 5 is assuming that more growth will automatically create more freedom. This is the one that tends to catch a lot of scale-up CEOs off guard, because often they go into scaling with the assumption that once the business gets bigger, things are going to get easier. As with more revenue, a larger team, and momentum, in theory, you'd assume that at some point things are going to lighten up. But for a lot of first time CEOs, the opposite actually happens. Because yes, the business gets bigger, but the pressure gets bigger with it. That's because every new level of success brings with it a new level of problems. As now, on top of continuing to drive growth, you have more people to lead, more complexity to manage, and with it, more decisions, expectations, and problems. And because the CEOs haven't evolved how they operate, problems and tasks still default to them, and they find themselves in the middle of everything. And because of it, the whole thing becomes heavier. So instead of getting more freedom, they end up with a bigger business that takes more from them. I hear it all the time from CEOs who started a business to build a life of freedom on their terms, yet instead they build a cage, and it now comes at the expense of their relationships, health, and happiness. I've seen it so many times where I'll speak to a CEO who on paper has this amazing business and success, but their partner is half out the door, they're barely present with their kids, and the doctors have told them that if they don't change, they're going to have a heart attack or something worse. This is why they're quietly wondering if the sacrifices are actually worth it. Yet with so many people counting on them, they feel trapped and like they can't slow down. This is why building a bigger business doesn't automatically create more freedom. It can if you change the way that you lead and operate within it, but if that doesn't shift, then growth doesn't fix the problem, it just scales the cost of it. And one of the biggest things I found from working with CEOs in 18 countries is that the ones who are able to finally get the freedom they were building towards are not the ones who just pushed harder or grew faster. Instead, it's the ones who actually changed the way that they operate as the business scaled, as the business was then able to grow around their evolution rather than in spite of it. That's why such a big part of the work we do in the Evolve CEO is focused on getting the business to run without you, so that you can actually enjoy the life, freedom, and success that you've worked so hard to create. So those are the 5 mistakes I see first-time CEOs make when scaling. Not defining what their CEO role actually looks like, staying too involved because it feels quicker and they know best, trying to fix an identity problem with tactical solutions, waiting too long to build the structure and team that the business now needs, and assuming that more growth will automatically create more freedom. Now, most CEOs watching this will recognize more than one of these mistakes, and the harder question to answer isn't whether they're happening, it's which one of them is the root cause in your specific situation. That's what my CEO Evolution Assessment was designed to help you uncover. It's free, and in 7 minutes, it's going to show you whether the way you're currently operating as CEO has evolved at the same pace as your business. And if you're running a scaling company, I personally review every submission and I send back a personalized report breaking down what's actually happening for the stage that you're at and what you need to address first. You can take the assessment using the link in the description below. So I'm curious, which of these 5 mistakes has resonated the most with you? Leave your thoughts down in the comments below. And if you found this useful, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button, as every week I put out new videos on becoming a more effective CEO. I've been Byron Morrison. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.